Welcome back to this already, the final segment of today's Price of Business, the special Best Stuff from the Radio on the TV segment with Rand Paul, U.S. Senator from Kentucky and a Republican candidate for the nomination of that party. Senator Paul, there is to me a third way in foreign policy, and frankly, I think your message both on foreign policy and civil liberties, you're making the Bill of Rights almost, I would think, centerpiece of your campaign, are so crucial. Americans are trading security, freedom rather, for security en masse, and I'm afraid they're going to get neither. And your foreign policy seems to be the only one that addresses that. Talk about that. And not foreign policy alone, but domestic policy as well.
Well, I think there's a spectrum on foreign policy from being nowhere any of the time and saying we are just going to remain here behind our oceans, and then that would be isolationism. And then the other extreme, though, is that we're everywhere all the time. And I think that's closer to where our foreign policy has been recently, is that we've considered that every civil war was worth our getting involved with, but often the unintended consequences come that when we involve ourselves everywhere all the time, sometimes we topple people in the Middle East and we wind up with something that's worse. So like in Libya, you had Hillary Clinton and Marco Rubio and Jeb Bush all saying it's a good idea to topple Gaddafi. Now they're saying the same about Assad. But I'm afraid what we got in Libya was worse. Our ambassador was assassinated. It's a failed state now, and a third of Libya pledges allegiance to ISIS. So I think really we do have to have a question, is there a middle ground? And actually, I was a big fan of Reagan growing up. You and I grew up in the Young Conservatives of Texas. I grew up about an hour away down in Houston and went to school at Baylor. But I was a fan of Reagan and went to the National Convention in 1976 when our family and my dad was a delegate for Reagan. And I think that Reagan actually occupied more of a middle ground. He believed in peace through strength, a strong national defense, a strong deterrent. But he also kept open lines of communication. He was not a diplomatic isolationist like some of the neoconservatives are today. He kept lines of communication open with Gorbachev and actually negotiated some of the reduction in the nuclear arsenal. But he did it from a position of strength and with verifying that the Russians were behaving and adhering to the protocol.
Yeah, absolutely. No question about it. What about on the civil liberties front? I noticed particularly early on in your debates, you kept on talking about the Bill of Rights. And I want to remind a listener, there would be no U.S. Constitution without the Bill of Rights. People like George Mason of Virginia said, we're not passing this thing without those Bill of Rights. They're crucial to our liberty. Talk a little bit about how they've been neglected and how you would treat them differently.
John Adams said that the spark that led to the War for Independence was really that the American colonists were upset about British soldiers coming into their house, writing their own warrants, having what was then called writs of assistance or generalized warrants. So really the Fourth Amendment says that you have to, when the government wants to come in your house, they have to specifically put your name on a piece of paper. They have to have probable cause or suspicion that you've committed a crime, and then they have to have an independent judge to sign that warrant. What I'm concerned with now is that in the fear over terrorism, people have said, oh, no, we can't do that. Takes too long. That's too cumbersome. We just need to look at everybody's phone records all of the time. We need to collect all the records in Utah and have them. Or we need to collect all of your credit card statements. See, people don't realize this, but right now 90 to 95% of your credit card statements are being collected by government. And if you were to look at a credit card statement for any individual, you can tell the majority of the time, do they drink, do they smoke, do they gamble, what books do they read, who are their doctors, what are their medicines, what diseases do they have. And that's information that's private, and I think a big mistake to give that to the hands of government. So I'm a big advocate of the Fourth Amendment and think it's equally important to all the others. Some Republicans, most Republicans have been good with the Second Amendment, but I tell people, look, if you want to protect the Second Amendment, you got to protect the Fourth Amendment, and you also have to protect the First Amendment. They're all important in protecting each other.
Yeah, absolutely. U.S. Senator Rand Paul from Kentucky, he's running for the presidency of the United States. And Rand, thanks so much for spending time with us today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on. We'll do it again soon.
You bet. All right. When we come back next time, we're going to have more for you. We want to remind you the show continues 24/7 at priceofbusiness.com. Have a great day. Spend it right here on this station.